Hey guys, this is Jonathan, and today we're going to go over how to make one of these little tombstones out of styrofoam. It's a real easy little project to do, and they look really cool when you make whole bunches of them. But we're just going to do one, and okay, let's get started with that. So I use this handy dandy ruler, but any ruler would do. I'm generally making these 2 inches wide. Mark it out with pen. You do not want to cut this on your kitchen table, because the pressure you need will go right through to the wood through any tablecloth or any newspaper or anything, but one of these cutting mats is really awesome for that. I'm going to totally cheat here because I want it to match the other one, so it's about that tall. Okay. And we're just going to make a little... Oh goodness, see how horrible that is? Alright, there we go. That's a little better. Wow, that was pretty terrible. Okay. And I will draw sidelines on here to make it a little easier when I have to cut it. And this one block will actually make 2. And now we're just going to cut along the line there that we drew. You know, once you just start playing with this stuff, you really realize how easy it is to make all different kinds of cool shapes and stuff. Something else, this is kind of thick for what I had in mind, so I'm going to cut this in half. A little trick that I use is I brace my thumb against the foam and kind of just pinch the pen to where it doesn't move at all, and you can just draw a pretty nice even line that even if you're not looking, it's pretty even, tends to stay right about in the same spot, except when you're going around curves. Okay, now this is the part I always mess up on, but we're going to go for it, and that is filleting this bad boy. Don't be scared to take more than one cut. If you try and go at it all in one shot, it's very often quite difficult to do. So, okay, we'll make one. Yeah, wow, that's not working at all. There's a little trick. Sandpaper. Wonderful. Okay, so we want this to look more like stone, so we're going to go ahead and carve all this off of here. And it may not look really like stone, but more stone-like. You want to be careful when you're using this knife. It's very sharp. The trick to that is it should always feel fairly easy, whatever you're cutting. If you ever get in a spot where you feel like you're gonna really have to use a lot of force to do something, then you shouldn't be holding it with your other hand. Okay. Basically what we're doing there is removing the plastic film that is on there from the plant. Now I'm going to kind of make these edges look more rough. to give it a more convincing look. I'll do a little bit more texturing on the back here. But I'm okay with that. So now we're going to do a little damage. I'll just say there was a mark there, like that. Sometimes we'll connect the top part like that. Do a little over here. Some more damage right in the middle, or that looks too contrived. Trying to randomize this stuff is there. And we'll make some little cracks that come off the where it was nicked. I find that shaking the blade kind of gives it a little bit more of the desired effect. Now for the RIP, I'm actually using a pen, and you can do quite a bit with a pen, but it's got to be the right kind of pen. What I mean by that is it can't have a really fine point. It has to have a fairly large ball point, and these kind of almost ballpoint gel style pens seem to work really well. Because you don't want to tear the foam so much as you want to compress it down. It's not as distinct as if you were to carve the RIP out, but let me tell you, it's pretty difficult to carve letters. I always have people asking me to carve letters and stuff in little foam bits for dioramas, and it is not that easy. You could get letters this size, but if you wanted to try and write someone's name on here, it's extremely difficult, and I can't get it to look very good. I could get it to look like, this vibe, this kind of Western, hacked in there with a hammer and chisel real quick, but to try and make it look, fancy, it just doesn't come out that well. Okay, and that is basically it. That is ready to be painted. Okay, so to speed things up, I already put one coat of black paint on this. But just to explain what I'm doing, got my little palette here. This is just a coffee can lid, and I'm using this black acrylic paint. Lots of people use this kind of paint, just any brand in a like a craft paint, which works fine. But for black and white, I use slightly thicker paint that would normally be used on a canvas. This is very, very low grade for painting on a canvas, but the pigment is a little bit better, and it's just a little bit thicker than the craft paint, which is useful some of the times, and since you're always mixing in either black or white with most of the colors you're using, just makes the most sense. So when you paint anything like this, you want to do 2 coats of black. I already put one on here, but I don't know if you can see it or not. Probably not. But there really is, you can see the pink foam and little spots through here all over the piece. And that happens with any kind of project you'll do with pink foam. Sometimes you can thin the paint down with water a little bit if you want to, and it might help to get into really deep cracks, or especially if you have little tears in the foam from it just wasn't cut very smoothly. It can help to have the thinner paint to get in those spots, but there are times where thicker paint really does help, like especially if you're painting a piece of foam that doesn't have the plastic removed from it, the thinner paint tends to just run right off, and you can't really, it almost beads up on it where it won't, you know, just won't lay evenly on it. It doesn't look right. And so it's just nice to have control over how thick the paint is, and if you have thinner paint, there's no way to make it thicker. I mean, I guess you could leave it sitting out or something crazy like that, but it's really not realistic. So, okay, so that is painted. We're going to just let that dry with the second coat, and then we will come back and do a dry brush. Okay, so now that this is all dry, we're going to go ahead and dry brush the kind of stone gray color on there. So we're just going to put a little bit of black. Eventually. There we go. And I'm using white from a tube. Once again, you can use craft paint, really any kind of acrylic paint whatsoever. Yeah. Good grief. Well, that was way too much. So let's separate this out a little bit. I'm using a palette knife to mix this up, but you could use, you know, a stir stick or an old paintbrush or just whatever you have around, really. I do find palette knives are easier to manipulate. So you can just kind of eyeball this. The color looks much, much darker once you put it on due to the black undercoat on the object. So let's go ahead and try that. Here I am with this ratty brush again. I really do need to get a new one, and yeah, you can tell I don't care about having paint on me at all. I will often use a piece of spare foam to wipe the excess paint off, but you can use whatever. Okay, so when you're dry brushing, the angle is very important. You don't want to go in like that because it'll just go straight into all the cracks. You want to kind of angle the brush a little bit and just drag it across like that. And all the work that you did before in putting texture on the item, you know, by sawing your blade back and forth and carving and all the little nooks and crannies that you made, or for some things if you pushed into it with like a rock or something like that to give it texture. All that will just slowly come out. Get that look. Oftentimes this brush is kind of, like I said, kind of failing on me here, so it's difficult to have it run smoothly over this without getting hung up in spots, so you get those kind of too much paint in one spot, and it looks really bad at first when you do it, but usually once you give it a moment to dry down a little bit, it doesn't look that bad. Also, if you get too much paint in one spot, you know, you can just kind of come around the area, the rest of the area, and sort of even it out, and it won't stand out to your eye so much, so it doesn't really look that bad. At first it would look just crazy horrible. All of a sudden just kind of blends in with everything else. Of course, everyone has their own way of doing this. Now, when you're dry brushing like this from a black undercoat to gray, you can constantly lighten up the gray tone. You can add a little bit more white paint, a little bit more white paint to add more depth to what you're doing, and you'll see, you know, gradients and spots where it looks lighter than other spots, and that's kind of cool. For this, we're only going to do 2 shades. So now I'm going to add a little bit of white to this gray right here, and just make a little slightly lighter color. It's quite a bit lighter actually, but that will work out just fine. And we're going to use that for some highlights, which probably going to end up, I always say highlights, I end up going over everything with it. But a lot of people like to go around where the most damaged areas are and kind of throw a lighter color on there. I like to do the edges, sometimes around cracks. Just, you know, sort of splotchy. You don't want it to be too even, because you don't want to cover all of the other tone of gray that was there before. Just give it a little bit more pop, a little more character. And lots of times I'll even go with just straight white, and that will look fine too. And actually maybe I'll add a little bit here to kind of show you that you can do that and it doesn't really look that bad. Just take a little white. Still gray on the brush, so it's going to be a little bit gray, but you can really just add a little white around the damage, and it'll look pretty cool. And there you go. That is basically done. If you wanted to, after this, you could put a sealer on there. Some people use Mod Podge, and that's generally what I use. The no gloss or the flat Mod Podge. But there you go. There's one tombstone. And like I said, if you do a bunch of these, it can really look pretty cool. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you.